You reach for a razor without thinking about it. A few strokes across the jaw. 30 seconds, maybe less, and the stubble is gone. It feels routine. It feels modern, like something invented alongside steel and running water. Billions of dollars move through the razor and blade industry every single year, all in service of a habit most people perform half asleep, barely looking in the mirror. But the evidence says this habit is not modern at all. Your ancestors were already doing this, tens of thousands of years before anyone on Earth had ever forged a blade. That should stop you for a second. How do you shave with no metal at all? For roughly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived without metal tools of any kind. No steel, no bronze, not even a scrap of iron ore had been touched by human hands. Metalworking itself is barely 6,000 years old. Compare that to cave paintings scattered across Europe, some more than 30,000 years old, that show human figures with smooth, hairless faces. Something was happening on those faces long before anyone could smelt anything. Start with the paintings themselves. Researchers at Israel's Davidson Institute of Science, including science writer Yonat Eshar, have pointed out just how rarely Ice Age cave art depicts beards. Not never, rarely. And that is strange because facial hair grows in on its own. You don't need a tool to have a beard. You need one to not have it. If the artists were painting the faces they actually saw around the fire, then something or someone was removing that hair on purpose. Now look at the sculptures instead of the paintings. The Venus of Brassempouy, a small ivory carving found in a French cave and dated to roughly 25,000 years ago, shows a woman's head with what looks unmistakably like styled hair, cut close to the skull and etched in a careful crosshatch pattern. The Venus of Willendorf, carved around the same era, shows something similar circling the top of the head, almost like rows of braids wound into a cap. These aren't rushed scratches. Someone spent real time getting the detail right. Ice Age humans were not just surviving day to day, they were grooming themselves, deliberately, the same way you might spend a few extra minutes on your hair before leaving the house. This kind of behavior didn't appear out of nowhere. Primatologists studying chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have long documented something called allo-grooming, meaning grooming performed on another individual rather than on yourself. It shows up constantly in wild chimp troops, and it is not just about picking parasites out of fur. It builds trust, it reinforces rank, it tells another individual, quite literally through touch, that you are safe to be close to. If that instinct was already present deep in your evolutionary history, long before any human ever struck a stone tool, then a prehistoric person plucking a friend's beard by firelight wasn't inventing a new behavior. They were simply pointing an old one at a new target. So what were they actually using? This is where it gets almost hard to believe. Obsidian, a natural volcanic glass formed when lava cools too fast to crystallize, fractures into edges that can be thinner than a modern surgical blade. In 1975, an experimental archaeologist named Don Crabtree decided to prove exactly how sharp. Crabtree had spent his life relearning the ancient craft of flint knapping, striking careful, controlled blows to flake blades off a stone core the way toolmakers had for millennia. He trusted his own obsidian blades enough to have heart surgery performed with them instead of steel. Later measurements found the edge on one of his blades came in at around 3 nanometers thick, a scale so small it's almost impossible to picture, but the result was an edge sharper than the steel scalpel sitting in a modern operating room. Obsidian wasn't a crude backup plan before metal came along. In some ways, it was simply better. Still, dragging a stone blade across your own throat with no mirror and no anesthetic sounds like a terrifying way to spend an afternoon. So maybe cutting wasn't always the method. There's a second, stranger thread of evidence. It comes from a description written by the 8th century Muslim scholar Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi, who recorded meeting a nomadic mountain tribe that removed their beard hair by plucking it, one strand at a time, with a tool shaped like tweezers. Slow, uncomfortable, but it needed no blade whatsoever. Archaeologists studying earlier prehistoric toolkits have found small clam and mussel shells with wear patterns that match exactly this kind of use, pinched shut like tiny natural tongs. None of this happened the same way everywhere either. Different environments handed people different tools. Groups near volcanic regions had easy access to obsidian and could work it into blades. Groups without it relied more on flint, on sharp-edged shells, or on plucking alone. Did every group even bother with this? Almost certainly not. Climate, culture, and available materials all shape the answer differently, the same way modern grooming habits shift from one part of the world today to another. What stayed consistent was the underlying behavior itself, not the specific tool used to carry it out. Picture it now. A person crouched at the edge of a firelit camp, turning a black flake of volcanic glass over in one hand, testing the edge against a strand of pole-taut hair before committing to the cut. The air smells like wood smoke and cooked meat. Somewhere behind them, children are still awake, and the low murmur of the group carries over the crackle of the fire. Or picture someone else entirely, a partner or a close friend, working slowly around the jawline with a pinched shell, plucking one hair at a time while the rest of the group talks over the sound of the wind. There was no mirror involved in any of this. There was no rush either. Just patience, trust, and someone else's steady hands doing something you couldn't easily do to your own face. This wasn't a quick task squeezed in before leaving for work. It was closer to a shared, unhurried ritual, repeated every few days for as long as anyone could remember. Why bother at all, though? That's the real question. And the obvious answer, vanity, probably isn't the right one. It's tempting to assume this was about looking good, the same instinct that has you checking a mirror before you leave the house. But there's a more interesting explanation underneath it, and it starts with parasites. In 2003, evolutionary biologist Mark Pagel and Walter Bodmer published the hypothesis proposing that humans lost most of their body hair specifically to reduce ectoparasites, meaning external parasites like lice and ticks that live and breed in thick hair. Humans, unusually among primates, are the only species known to carry fleas. Less hair meant fewer places for something to hide, breed, and eventually spread disease through a group living in close quarters around a shared fire. Removing facial hair on purpose fits that same logic exactly. It wasn't decoration, it was pest control, executed by hand, one patch at a time. There's a second angle to the twist, and it has nothing to do with hygiene. A face full of hair gives an opponent something to grab. Centuries later, in 331 BCE, Alexander the Great reportedly ordered his Macedonian soldiers to shave their beards before the Battle of Gaugamela, specifically so enemies in close combat would find nothing to grip onto. That order wasn't about looking sharp for the history books. It was tactical, plain and simple. It's entirely possible your prehistoric ancestors had already worked out the exact same logic, tens of thousands of years earlier, against rival humans, or against something with claws, with nobody around to write any of it down. And under both of those explanations sits a quieter one that might matter just as much. Grooming, in any form, sends a signal. It says, I have time and energy to spend on something other than pure survival. That is not a small thing in a world where most days were built entirely around finding the next meal. A well-kept face was, in its own way, a visible health report, readable from across the fire before a single word ever got spoken. It told a potential partner, a rival, or the rest of the group something true about your condition without you having to say anything at all. Which brings this back to you, standing at a bathroom sink with a blade you didn't have to make yourself, from steel you didn't have to mine, on a morning you didn't have to plan around at all. It takes you 30 seconds and barely a thought. You might do it alone, with the door shut, headphones in, thinking about the rest of your day instead of the motion of your own hand. That part is new. The motion itself is not. Somewhere inside that small automatic habit is an instinct that outlived the Ice Age, outlived Obsidian,
outlived every single material humans have used to carry it out since. You are not doing something new when you shave. You are repeating something your ancestors were already doing when the sharpest object on the entire planet was a shard of volcanic glass, and the only mirror available was the look on someone else's face across a fire. You still reach for the razor without thinking about it. Now, you know exactly how far that reach actually goes.